Welcome to Grappling with the Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making, and we're clearly seeing both sides of complex issues and better navigating the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and I would like to welcome my guest today. With me is Mark Brown, who is world champion speaker, an executive coach, and an artificial intelligence software advisor. We're not sure whether Mark's here today or whether
I am not a bot. Click here.
Deb Coviello, the drop-in CEO, is author, speaker, podcast host, and silver medalist curler who coaches C-suite leaders of today and tomorrow to navigate challenges with confidence.
Very cool.
And Kimberly Davis is an author, TEDx speaker, and founder of the Brave Leadership University, leading development programs worldwide around authentic leadership, purpose, presence, and influence. Thank you all for being with me today.
My pleasure, Rabbi.
Thanks for having us, Yonason.
Pleasure. And here is our topic. Days after a highly charged appearance before a congressional hearing, University of Pennsylvania President Liz Magill resigned under pressure after she refused to condemn anti-Semitism and genocidal slogans as violations of her school's rules of conduct, despite subsequently offering a public apology. Curiously, the presidents of Harvard and MIT, who gave virtually identical testimony at the same hearing, have received overwhelming support from their boards and faculty. Meanwhile, wealthy alumni are withdrawing their support in droves. It's hard to imagine that the three presidents did not confer with one another prior to the hearing, since they all gave the same answers almost verbatim. For President Magill, at least, that seems to have been inadequate preparation. How might she have better prepared herself for the hearing? And what went so awry? Also, what are we to make of the radically divergent reactions among three similar university communities? The responses of MIT and Harvard appear to be really about core principles or more about territorial autonomy and political posturing. In general, how should leaders respond when their comments or behavior creates unexpected controversy? When and how can leaders recover from mistakes? And when are they fatal to future elective leadership? Lots of directions we could go. The floor is open.
I'm just going to jump in here. In your opening, you talked about it's surprising that we had radically different reactions to what we construe as similar universities. Now, from an education perspective, yes, they may be some of the best, higher educational institutes. But when you look at it into the context of core values, and one university's reaction differently than the other, we might look at it from the foundation. Maybe their values are slightly different and they're not as like as we think. Hence, the different response and reaction and resignation of one, whereas the other two still remain. Just one thing I wanted to point out.
Well, that's a really interesting point. It speaks to identity. We stereotype. We say, well, these are all Ivies. They must all be alike, and we do the same thing with people and colors and religions and parts of the world too, don't we?
Absolutely.
Yes, we do, Rabbi, because I have also experienced it where someone sent me a message once, a politically based message, and he had sent it to me. It held a particular position, and he made the assumption that I shared his position based upon my ethnic background. And I had to correct him. And we have to be aware, we as humans do run the risk, as Deb pointed out, of making an assumption that since they all have heard this particular topic, they should all have the same opinion. And even going deeper, as you said, Rabbi, they gave pretty much similar responses, almost verbatim, but the responses to those reactions were different based upon who was hearing it, their belief system, and belief systems aren't always on the surface. Belief systems aren't always on the surface. There could be 2 or 3 different people who, while they heard everybody else say the same thing, for us, that's not appropriate. And therefore, we are going to put pressure on you to either walk that back, retract it, or we can part ways as friends and move on. So not only are we different in our responses, that could be based also upon our community, our perspective. Who are our constituents? How will they respond to the same statement based upon our belief system, our culture? And it leads me to realize we have several cultures within our US culture. I'll stop there. Please
Kimberly,
unmute.
you are muted.
I will leave this one to y'all right now. I think I'll jump in a little bit later.
Well, Rabbi?
Well, you did put me in mind, Mark, that we get these apologies frequently when people say things and do things that are not well received. And often we are a little bit skeptical whether the apologies are motivated by real remorse or are simply damage control. Now, there was an incident that happened here in Missouri a little while ago that I thought was really instructive. It was a small town, I didn't even recognize the name. And at a city council meeting debating something as mundane as trash collection, the mayor made a remark about the price they were paying. He said, we didn't want to try to Jew them down, which is an old expression associated with the stereotype that Jews are cheap and try to negotiate and get last penny. Now, this is a fella who had, in all likelihood, never met a Jew. And he didn't know that there was anything wrong with this particular expression, the way that many of us, when we were younger, used the expression to gyp someone, without having any idea that there was an ethnic component to that remark. Since then, most of us have stopped using that expression.
I didn't know that.
Well, yeah, and I was very impressed with the mayor's response because he appeared to be very contrite, to explain that he had no idea that this was something offensive. He was appreciative that it was pointed out to him. So I think often we can get a feel for whether or not an apology is coming from a place of genuine remorse or whether it's just pro forma, in which case we're less likely to be appeased by such apologies.
It's so difficult because these presidents, we don't know whether they're speaking from their own personal set of values, who they are as a human being, what really is true for the university, which universities are supposed to be places that encourage open dialogue of different opinions. And so what's the university's values? What's the university's purpose? What's the standpoint of the donors, which as a president of a university, you have a responsibility to make sure the university doesn't lose their financial backing. So there's some responsibility there. What's culture? I mean, there's so many different pieces at play here that my suspicion is that the responses were solely what the attorneys told them to say, that I don't believe that they had the freedom to speak their truth. And they may not even know their truth because there are so many different conflicting pieces to this conversation that are painful on every side. Because there is no nice way to talk about genocide. Genocide is a horrific topic, and I don't think that they could speak from what was true for them. I don't believe that they were given latitude to do that. That's my suspicion.
And I'd love to lean into that, and that is probably a very, very true statement. So then what we need to do then is step up in the hierarchy of then who are the controlling entities and the significant interested parties. They may simply be a figurehead for which we are putting them in front of the public eye to make certain statements and not simply to protect the masses. But I think we need to look more deeply, not just at these presidents and what they were told or advised to say, but let's now look at then the cultures of the universities, their value system. These, if nothing else, should be a greater opportunity to say, okay, what are the values of the boards, of the constituency, the students, and the people that finance them? Because maybe the greater opportunity out of all of this and the damage control could be we need to revisit humanity in all aspects. And we should still be free to have free speech and have the awareness and the education and the understanding of the different perspectives, but how to manage that in a productive way.
Well, and I don't know, Deb, how do you have free speech and these vastly different opinions? I don't know. This is probably the most difficult topic that Jonathan has ever brought to the table.
He throws good ones at us.
Oh, goodness gracious.
There's so many things I'd like to pick up before I let you back in, Mark. One is, are these presidents, what you're suggesting, Kimberly, which may be true, is that these presidents are not actually powerful.
Well, I do think that once you get, a CEO is the CEO until the board says, no, you can't say this. And the attorneys say, no, you can't say this. And I think you're powerful until something like this happens. And then I think your power is stripped
so I mean, if my title is president, I think there's a presumption of leadership, which may be in name only. But that's what leadership is. It's stepping up when it's tough, when your people are telling you to do something that's not proper. And rather than rolling over and saying, well, I have to give in to the powers that be, wherever they are, as opposed to saying, no, this requires a strong statement. And as you say, Deb, trying to balance the different perspectives, but doing it without the wishy-washy prevarication.
Well, and I think that's the problem, is that how do they, I think that they get pulled in so many directions by so many advisors, and so that I do not think they brought true leadership to this conversation, because they did not stop to really ask themselves what is true for them. I don't know that we saw that. I don't know that presented itself, because they lost their own voice in the mix of everything.
But that begs the question, Kimberly, when a leader or a CEO, a university president speaks, are they speaking as themselves, or do they speak as a representative of the organization that they represent?
Oh, well, you could just look to our political parties to see truth in that, right? I mean, it's what this group of people says you should say, and you don't want to mess with your donors, and you don't want to, I mean, when there's a lot of money involved in this too. So there's, I mean, I think we can talk about this as what a leader should do. And we all know that a leader should have the strength of character to be able to speak to what is right and what they believe. And we all also know that that is a bit of a fantasy in most situations. I mean, there are so many different things at play that right and good and true often get lost in the mix.
Well, as you said earlier, there's a board that decides that the CEO, as powerful as they may be, we don't appreciate what you said. And as a consequence, your time here is over. And they may be a strong leader in other areas. And you also did say earlier that the president has the responsibility of making sure the millions keep coming in. That's part of their portfolio. We understand that. And at a time when an individual may speak their mind, what really is in their heart, they do run the risk of losing the position. And I found it interesting that, Jonathan, you said that she resigned under pressure, which means there were those who thought it was best for her to resign. Now, full disclosure, I do know an individual who was at the helm of an international organization who made a statement at one point unwittingly causing offense to members of the audience, who approached them about it, made them aware of the offense they had caused. They apologized sincerely to them individually. They apologized within the organization. And it turns out that did not appear to be enough. I interviewed this individual, had a long talk with them. They were on my podcast recently, by the way, and I'm happy to share it with you later on down the road. But the individual, a friend of mine, eventually agreed to tender their resignation because, and they told me this very clearly, I decided to tender my resignation to protect the organization.
Right.
Some may say, well, they fell on the sword. But yes, they told me to my face, I made that decision to resign to protect the organization. The pain, the aftermath was horrendous. I will not go into that, but I admire the decision. They could have fought, and there were opposing opinions about what they could have done.
Yeah.
But they said to protect the organization, it was best for me to resign. And that is what they did.
Well, I mean, ultimately, these leaders, regardless of their title, are human beings.
Indeed.
And they are going to be fallible. And they are also going to, I mean, can you imagine the pressure that they're under? So let's take your friend example, Mark. Would you want the success or failure of an entire organization and all the livelihoods and everything that is on based on your decision to stay or go? That is, you can find another job, but I mean, we have to remember these are human beings. And if I were in the position of the president who chose to resign, it is quite possible. And you look at people fleeing the Senate right now, it is quite possible that the pressures of today's modern world are not they are not the reason they chose to be in the position. They can't reach their purpose in the position they're in, given the circumstances. And we make it like it's such an evil thing to leave, to make a choice that this is, I'm not going to stay. But they're a human being. So I think if you can find a way to say, I believe in this and I'm going to stay and fight because I believe in this fight. And I believe that this is, something, I bring something to this conversation that will make it better, then yay. But if you are thinking, why am I doing this? They're ripping me apart as a human being. They're ripping my family apart. They're like, I'm being told I'm not good at my job. I mean, if you have to think, leaders are human beings first, regardless of their title. And I think we lose that in this conversation.
No, that's a really, really good point. And I would love to just add a little bit of some thought as I think through what actually happened then to the leader that eventually resigned and apologized, whether we thought it was sincere, under pressure, under a very terse situation. One thing that I feel from this is the fact that there was some action taken, again, the repercussions of freedom of speech, that at least it moved the conversation forward a little bit with that university where they did resign and apologize. Whether it was sincere or not, it at least acknowledged a mistake or misinterpretation or lack of understanding, whatever the opportunity is down the road. And at least potentially in the future, while this may still be a very hot topic, that institution might gain back some favor or points because of taking some kind of action and rebuild trust during a very challenging political, cultural time.
And also, we live in a time where cancel culture is rampant and prevalent.
Yeah.
And to the idea of risking being canceled because you hold fast to a position, that is a decision the individual must make. Each individual must make on their own.
For themselves.
One of the things that comes to mind for me is when Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon after Nixon resigned. It was widely seen as a corrupt action. There was a lot of suspicion that it was a deal, that Nixon made Ford his vice president with the expectation that Ford would pardon him. And years and years and years later, virtually everybody agrees it was the right decision. that it would have been horrific for the country to be dragged through a criminal trial of a former president.
Yeah.
Ford ended up losing the election by a much closer margin than anybody expected. And it's also widely believed that if not for the pardon of Nixon, he probably would have been reelected.
Yeah.
But in my mind, that's a real moment of leadership. He did something that he knew would be unpopular,
Right.
but he also knew it was best, and he was prepared to deal with the consequences. So, when you talk about Kimberly, the courage sometimes involved in stepping down.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If I can't do my job effectively, whether it's my fault or not,
Right.
I really have a responsibility to step aside. But it's sad in a case like the one you described, Mark, as I understood it, is someone who really didn't do something that was proportionate to the response, who did everything reasonable for damage control, and it just wasn't enough for the people involved. And that strikes me as a little more sad.
But it does happen. And I said, I don't mean to beat the cancel culture idea to death here, but oh so easily I find we are less forgiving of others than we are wanting to be forgiven. I believe we are less forgiving of others than to the extent we want to be forgiven. It's easy to say, how could they do that? How could they say that? Get rid of them. I don't want to hear their name again. And the idea of 3 strikes only works in baseball. It doesn't work in life anymore. You make one mistake, not only are you out, but you are out permanently unless there's some great act of redemption that restores you.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the way our society has shifted in the last several years. And I think it's unfortunate because all of us err, all of us make mistakes.
That's right.
And all of us want to be forgiven. So why are we so unwilling to forgive those who are contrite, who are genuinely trying to make amends? No, you did it. I can't forgive. And it brings to mind, I'm on dangerous ground here, Rabbi, but it brings to mind a book I read back in the 1960s by a former prisoner of war in World War II entitled I Cannot Forgive. You may have heard of it. Rudolf Varba was the author, VRBA. And he had such horrendous treatment. But my question is, we are unwilling to forgive, but is the act really that egregious? And I don't know that's true in every situation. Because again, our opinions come to bear. Our thoughts come to bear. What we think is right comes to bear. And if we are influencers, we can influence others on our side. And then someone who is truly contrite, who wants to make amends, may not even be given a chance to do so. And that is unfortunate.
And the responses are often, as you say, so out of proportion. We're not perfect, and we're not designed to be, and we're not supposed to be. King Solomon says, "There's no righteous person in the world who does good and does not sin." Now the word sin is even not a perfect translation. It really should be who does not err.
Error, yeah.
Because when you're trying to do good, when you're pushing yourself to new limits, when you're striving to deal with difficult situations, nobody's going to get it right all the time.
No.
And the only person who doesn't make a mistake is the person who does nothing. And that's often a much more egregious mistake than any misstep along the way. So what we're actually doing is we're discouraging people from making an effort to better themselves and better situations.
Right. And to learn how to talk about hard things, which you model so beautifully, Jonathan, because the thing is when you talk about hard things, there are going to be missteps. There are going to be, I'm trying to understand this out loud with you, and this is uncomfortable, and I'm awkward and imperfect. And there's going to be, there is, for every position you take, there is going to be just as many people who say that is the wrong position as the number of the people that will say that's the right position. So there is no perfect position to take. There just isn't. And it takes a tremendous amount of vulnerability in this society that we live in to take a stand, because you are going to be wrong to just as many people as you are going to be right.
And there's one more beast to that, Kimberly, in my opinion, and it is the fact that we don't also realize that our opinions can and do change over time.
Yeah.
A hard and fast stance in 1983 can be completely reversed in 2023.
Right.
Or it could be not 40 years, but 40 days.
Right.
And if we cancel someone and write them off, we don't give them room to learn, to grow, and to change. Maybe they were wrong and didn't realize it at that time.
Yeah.
All of us in our lives have found ourselves in a place where we thought that was right. And given a chance to do it again, you know what? I would have done that differently. Who has said that before? Guilty.
Right. Exactly. Well, who among us is not human? Maybe you're AI, Mark, but we all fail. We all make mistakes, and we all make missteps.
You know, one of the things
There's very little grace in this
Give grace.
society anymore.
Go ahead, Deb.
You know, this is related, but this is such a good conversation, and I'm so grateful that Jonathan has brought this forward, because if it was simply a misstep within a few universities, again, a significant one, it's actually a good thing that this has come out, because if it was a misstep and recognized by a few as being really bad, it could be the tip of the iceberg of just general humanity losing touch with tolerance and what this country has come to be. I mean, again, Mark, you were talking earlier that, your country of origin is a melting pot. And we have to ultimately, there may be some points of intolerance, but ultimately, in order to be able to live purposeful lives, we have to tolerate. So while this is a unfortunate set of circumstances for these universities, might this spawn more discussions and revisit our tolerance of different lifestyles and cultures and seek to understand what they are about, the things that they do bring. And if there is tension, let's have conversation about that. So I'm just grateful that you have brought this topic up, Jonathan.
Well, the topic came up, you're independent of me. And it really is it gives cause for a lot of thought, because as we've said already, we believe in free speech, we believe in free expression, and yet we also believe that there have to be boundaries of mature and responsible behavior.
Yeah.
And the United States, which is also famously the melting pot, I think it's been observed many times, and correctly, that we are increasingly less a culture of common values. And that is really cause for concern, because diversity of viewpoints, of culture, of thought is a priceless gift, as long as there's sufficient common ground for us to be unified.
Yeah.
And if we lose that, then this type of episode is going to be tame compared to what happens moving forward.
Well, I thank you, Jonathan and Deb, because my final thought would be this. If we really think it through, someone makes a statement we disagree with, we find maybe hurtful. We've known them for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And everything we've known about them, our experience with them, our relationships are tossed aside because of one statement. And we can so easily disregard our 30 years of relationship, what we've accomplished together, what we've agreed on, and we discard all that because of one statement.
One statement.
Just to be thought on. So thank you for raising the issue, Jonathan. We're still thinking about it. There's no clear-cut answers from me anyway.
And Jonathan, I think you brought up such a great point when you said we believe in free speech and there have to be boundaries. And what breaks my heart is that these are some of the greatest universities in the United States, and there is an opportunity to create an open, healthy dialogue that is anchored in humanity, right? That is anchored in making humanity better. And what happens is we're getting sidetracked from the bigger conversation by the politics of the situation. And I feel like we have lost such an opportunity to have an open dialogue about what's really happening in the world and how can we all participate in making it a better place. And instead we rush to condemn and judge and punish. And should that happen? Yes, perhaps. But if we could instead say, what are these boundaries that we are going to collectively agree upon? Because I think we've lost those. I think we've lost sight of how do we do both, have freedom of speech and keep it a healthy civil dialogue. I believe we have lost our way in that.
And these should be the conversations those institutions should be having once we get through this wave of challenge.
Yeah, I think so. And
but will they, or will we, or have these conversations been shut down?
Well, that's just it, and that's the irony. In other words, you were apologizing, Mark, for bringing up cancel culture, and if you bring it up again, I will not mute your microphone. But there are so many reports of speakers being disinvited, of speakers being shouted down, an unwillingness. I mean, I remember seeing a video of a person in the square trying to engage people in a different point of view in discussion. And these people literally turned their backs, put their hands over their ears, and started chanting, "Walk away, walk away, walk away." It's surreal. If I'm secure in my opinion, I should be able to articulate it. And if I'm insecure in my opinion, that should give me pause to wonder if maybe it's an opinion that's worth having. And one of the things that was so distressing to many is that among college campuses that have very strict rules of speech governing a whole array of ethnicities and groups, couldn't take a stand when it came to anti-Semitism. And we're not going to get into the uniqueness of anti-Semitism here, but it's the inconsistencies, the double standards. And that's what's really galling, and that's much of what's tearing us apart.
Yeah. It's not to not be totally inclusive for a holistic conversation. Yeah.
Well, I would love to go on, but it seems like we've come to a natural pause. So I will thank all of you for a really, really stimulating and thoughtful conversation. My goodness, we got just a few letters of the alphabet represented here. It's hard for me to figure out who's in alphabetical order. Thank you, Mark Brown, Deb Coviello, and Kimberly Davis. It's been an absolute pleasure having you back, and look forward to next time. For those of you who are watching or listening, if you have a topic you'd like us to take up, please go to my website, ethicsninja.com, use the contact information, submit your idea. If it's compelling, we will certainly use it for a future episode. And until next time, as always, I encourage you to continue grappling with the gray.